Seth Leibson, Chris Buskirk. It's principles and politics. The Seth and Chris Show is on now.
I am Chris Buskirk. He is Seth Leibson, and our guest is Brandon Weichert. Brandon is a contributing editor to American Greatness. Welcome to the show, Brandon. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. It's great to be back. How you doing, Seth?
Seth is no longer with us.
Oh,
Seth, he had to dash out a little early today, so it's just you and me.
Well, that's great. Okay, well then I'm doing well, and hope you're doing well too.
I am indeed. I think Tucker Carlson's been on an absolute roll this week, bringing to heel some of the
Democratic globalists in our party.
That's them. That's the term I was looking for. I had Ralph Peters on earlier in the week. He had Max Boot on.
Real quickly though, I do like Ralph Peters generally. His books got me through a lot of tough liberalism indoctrination and my undergrad, so I do have a soft spot for the lieutenant colonel.
Well, watch the video with him and Tucker again.
No,
I think you'll get over it.
It was embarrassing. I felt very sad for him because he's normally even when I disagree with him, a very solid source of information. But that interview was not his best moment.
No, it wasn't. It was bad. And this interview with Max Boot is
hilarious.
Hilarious. I mean, it's hilarious. Nobody does the look like you. I can't believe you're saying this on national television better than Tucker.
I know.
You know what, Bill? Can you cue it up? Actually, not the Ralph Peters part, but can you cue it up and play it from where he starts with Max Boot? Thank you.
Max, thanks a lot for coming on. Now, I think it's
fair. Me, Tucker.
I think it's fair to disagree about whether or not cooperating with Russia in the fight against ISIS is a good idea. But to dismiss anyone who doesn't share your view as a Nazi sympathizer seems cheap and a shortcut and not really befitting a self-described genius like yourself. Why would you say something like that?
Well, rest assured, Tucker, I'm not actually saying that you're a Nazi sympathizer. And the one thing that I would disagree with Colonel Peters about is I don't think that Putin is comparable to Adolf Hitler because there was only one Hitler.
Can you pause it there? You know, by the way, Brandon, you notice the little barb that Tucker threw in there, self-described genius, because Max Boot has described himself that way in the past.
Oh, I know all about Max Boot, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
So, yeah, I mean, but I like that he says, well, no, I'm not actually saying that, I'm not saying you're a Nazi sympathizer, and brush it, but I guess silence is consent on this. He is, I am saying, however, that I'm a genius.
Well, and also, if you really read into it, he's saying that he thinks that Putin's not like Hitler, but for the context of our times, he's just as bad, but he's not Hitler. So he's still, in a way, saying that, okay, you may not be Hitler, maybe you're Mussolini, or maybe you're, someone slightly less evil than Hitler, but still evil. So it's a way of it's what the left used to do during the Iraq War. Anybody who even mentioned that, hey, I'm supporting our troops, suddenly they became, you're a Nazi, you're supporting, and it's the same kind of just thoughtless criticism now being directed at pro-Trump Republicans or Trump sympathizers by the Democratic globalists, the same people who are urging us to go into Iraq and destabilize the entire region.
The invade the world, invite the world crowd.
The war boys.
The war boys. Yeah, I like that. Go ahead with that, Bill.
Is that Mitt Romney was right. I was a foreign policy advisor on the Mitt Romney campaign in 2012 when he said that Putin is the #1 geopolitical threat that we face. I think that's true today. And I'm very disturbed, Tucker, when I see you at the top of the show.
Can you pause it? Sorry, can you pause it there? Brandon, you know a lot about these things. Do you think that Putin is the #1 geopolitical threat?
Well, the first thing I want to say is Max Boot is either purposely misleading or he doesn't remember properly. I just did a podcast on my website about this. What Romney said was that they were the #1 geopolitical foe. And I know that sounds like I'm parsing language, but he picked that word very carefully because it indicates that they're a competitor. They are the Burger King to our McDonald's, but they are not an existential threat that's going to nuke us tomorrow the way the Soviet Union was. That's the first point. And the second point is I don't think that they are the number one existential threat. The only two existential threats that we have are what you mentioned earlier. The first is Islamism, and the second, in domestic politics, is the left.
Where do you place China on that in terms of geopolitical
so this has
foes?
So this has been a big part of my research at my website. I'm giving a lecture at the Institute of World Politics on this, actually. The real threat to world stability is China. If you're looking in terms of great power politics, it's not that China is going to go to war with us tomorrow, but China is keenly aware of what Graham Allison refers to as the Thucydides trap, which is basically that when a rising power with a different cultural background is taking more and more power globally or in the international system, there is a statistical probability, this is based on historical analysis, 12 out of 15 conflicts surveyed found that the rising power and the declining power, in this case the U.S., go into a devastating war. And so China's keenly aware of this, and they are preparing to, try to displace the United States, at least in East Asia, possibly globally in the long run. Michael Pillsbury, a leading China scholar, wrote The 100-Year Marathon, came out 2 years ago, in which he basically says, no, I've talked to Chinese generals, and they're open about the fact that within 100 years they plan to be the world's hegemon, with America being left in the dust. And they have a preemptive military strategy, according to people like Ding Chang over at Heritage. So in my view, China not only has the will and the economic potential and the manpower to implement these revanchist ideals, but they also have the military capability they're investing in now. Whereas Russia, they may have a design for taking over more parts of the former Soviet space, but really they don't have the ability anymore to do it. They've got a strong military, but that military is limited. And their real interest is, I think, trying to rehabilitate their Far Eastern holdings, which means that they're going to be going up against China because China wants to take as much of Russia's resource-rich Far East as possible, and they slowly are. So in my view, China's a bigger threat than Russia. And in Russia, we may have somebody who's a pain in the neck, like Putin, and who's not a good guy, and who may have disagreements with us, but we do have two key areas of interest where we overlap, against terrorism and against potentially China.
Yeah, this doesn't seem that complicated to me. I mean,
it's really not.
if you've ever spent an afternoon playing the board game Risk, this is pretty obvious, right? I mean, great power politics.
Well, it's back. It's back.
It's back, but it's also not that complicated to understand. The execution's the tricky part. Getting how the puzzle pieces fit together really shouldn't be.
It should be, and also, it's kind of funny that the same people who talk about being, the smartest people in the room, i.e. Max Boot, they then sit there and they basically engage in pointless, virtue signaling on a foreign policy level as if it's 1995. We don't have the luxury
or 1985.
Anymore. Yeah, we don't have the luxury anymore. We have gone back to the 19th century. Victor Davis Hanson writes a lot about postmodern warfare and how we're fighting using postmodern warfare, and yet we're fighting pre-modern ideologies. The solution, in my view, is to go back and open up the old playbook from the 19th century when we had multiple powers, great powers, and we need to start getting back to that style of thinking where we're not always going to have people who are perfect Democrats to do business with on the world stage. We're not going to always be able to dictate terms the way we did in the post-Cold War era before Iraq. We're going to have to start limiting ourselves at certain points, capitalizing on our strengths where we can. I think investing significantly in space weapons is a great way to do that. And then on the diplomatic level, working and making deals. This is the deal-making president that we have. Let's use that. Let's stop moral virtue signaling in the foreign policy arena and get down to business.
Yeah, Brandon, we're going to go over a break here, but think about this, because when we talk about great power politics, China's a rising power. It's got a large population, potentially a large GDP, a large military. It seems obvious to me that one of the ways we can balance that is with relationships with Russia and with India. We're going to go to a break, and then I'd like to hear your comments on that on the other side.
Sure.
This is the Seth and Chris Show. I am Chris Buskirk. My guest is Brandon Weichert, contributing editor to American Greatness. Find his work at amgreatness.com. Brandon, Great Power Politics is back. You've made the case, I think, persuasively. I think anybody who spends 5 minutes looking at what's going on internationally will see that that is the case, and that the United States needs to adapt its foreign policy and its national security policy to this new reality. The rising power, of course, is China, and the best thing that the United States can do is to keep China busy in their own part of the world, and to me that means Russia and that means India. Those seem like natural relationships for us. China is if a rising China poses a geostrategic threat to the United States, they certainly do to their neighbors, and their neighbors include India and Russia. A, do you agree with that? And B, how would you see that working out? How diplomatically, how do you think the United States plays that?
Well, I certainly see that as it is. And remember, last month in the build-up to Xi and President Xi and Prime Minister Modi of India's meeting, the Chinese launched an unprovoked helicopter attack on Indian border outposts in the Himalayan mountains on the border with China. And there's been an ongoing standoff between the Chinese and the Indians over that portion of the border, shared border. So yeah, that's a big problem. How I would do it is we're already starting to do it, and the Trump administration is doing an excellent job with this, with their reaching out to Modi in India. Start doing joint naval exercises, start selling Navy equipment, start opening the kind of the vault doors to India. In fact, India is now competing with Saudi Arabia for the leading arms importer in the world, and we should be there giving training and assistance and building up a network to counter the rise of China. Get Japan in on it. Get, even if we can, South Korea, though I'm more skeptical about them. Get these Asian powers and India, of course, on board to kind of build the southern periphery. And then in the northern periphery, we get Russia. We make a better deal with Russia. Putin wants to develop his Far East. He knows that he needs to do it quickly because the Chinese are sending millions of migrants up per year, thousands, and they've got millions there now. And the plan for the long term is to basically overpopulate the ethnic Russians in the region and basically just return that part of Russia to China that Russia's had since 1689. The Russians know this. They're trying to do what they're doing in Europe and in the Middle East in order to secure their borders and pivot to the east. So we should make a deal with them in the Middle East and in Ukraine, and then basically channel all that aggressive Russian urge and get it to go to China and complicate China's designs.
Well, Brandon, you just did it. Now you've proved that you're a Putin stooge. The next thing I'm going to find out is that you enjoy Russian dressing too.
I do, and I like vodka too.
Preferably together, right? Brandon Weichert's my guest. Thanks so much, Brandon. Have a good weekend. We'll talk to you again real soon. You can find his work at amgreatness.com. I'll be back next week. Have a good weekend.